Some scars never fade. I was 10 when my world shattered in a summer camp that should have been fun. Instead, it was hell complete with beatings, humiliation, and the kind of betrayal no kid should ever experience. The kind of kid who took apart toys not to break them, but to figure out how they worked. My world revolved around science kits, model airplanes, computers, and every aviation manual I could get my hands on. I had this firm belief that the world, at its core, was fair, that adults were protectors, that rules were there for a reason, and bullies were a thing of movies or fairy tales. My mom sewed my name into my socks and underwear, and my dad gave me an old Swiss Army knife, just in case. When we pulled up to the bus stop, there were dozens of other kids milling around with the same wide-eyed wonder. My mom blew me a kiss and my dad gave me a thumbs up. I imagined camp counselors with whistles and warm smiles. I pictured new friendships being forged over marshmallows and board games. I thought I was heading toward adventure. That image, that final snapshot of innocence, has stayed with me longer than I care to admit, because that was the last time I ever felt truly safe. That was the last time the world made sense. Parents kissed foreheads, handed over last-minute snacks, and whispered "have fun" like it was a blessing. I couldn't wait to show other kids how to build a basic radio from scratch or impress them by identifying constellations. I imagined myself leading treasure hunts and maybe, just maybe, even winning a too. That when you followed the path, kept your head down, and treated others with kindness, life would smile back at you. While other boys were memorizing football stats, I was geeking out over jet propulsion and microprocessors. It wasn't just any camp, it was a legit overnight summer camp in the countryside. Forests, lakes, cabins, bonfires, and games. 2 weeks of adventures, new friends, and campfire stories. For a 10-year-old with a hunger for knowledge and a heart full of trust, it felt like a dream come true, and I was fine with that. I liked who I was. The boy who tormented me was older, crueler, and untouchable. Or so he thought. Decades later, fate gave me a shot at revenge. Not petty payback, but a reckoning. This isn't just a story of survival. It's about turning trauma into strength and serving justice cold, one brutal piece at a time. Back then, I was just a sweet, slightly chubby nerd with a big heart and a head full of curiosity. Despite being on the heavier side, I was never the outcast. My classmates generally liked me. I was the dependable kid who helped with homework, fixed your Walkman, and didn't snitch when someone got a little too creative with test answers. Sure, I wasn't the most athletic or the loudest in the room, but I was funny in a quiet way and polite to a fault. Teachers praised me, and parents trusted me. If anything, I floated just under the radar of cool, respected but not envied, liked but not adored. And honestly, I was okay with that too. What I wasn't okay with was how sheltered I was. So, when my parents told me I'd be going to a summer camp for 2 weeks, I was over the moon. I started prepping weeks in advance. I packed books, tools, my favorite Game Boy, and even a mini telescope. The morning of departure was pure adrenaline. I was jittery with excitement, barely touching my breakfast. I triple-checked my duffel bag. As I boarded the bus, I remember turning to wave at my parents. I sat near the window, watching the city fade into fields and forests. But what I didn't realize, what I couldn't possibly imagine, was that I was heading straight into a nightmare. When the bus finally rolled through the gates of the camp, I was buzzing with excitement. Kids were cheering, counselors were waving, and there was that smell: pine trees, sun-baked dirt, and old wood. I remember stepping off, clutching my duffel bag, eyes darting from one new face to another, eager to find my people. But from the start, something felt off. The counselors weren't the warm, energetic guides I imagined. I ended up in the farthest one, a cramped wooden box with 8 bunks and peeling paint. The counselors gave half-hearted speeches about safety and fun, but RL and his little gang, 2 other older boys and a couple of mean-looking girls, were already testing boundaries, making snide remarks, tossing other kids' stuff around, and eyeing me with open disdain. I tried grabbing arms, kicking, punching wildly, but I was small and they were older, stronger, merciless. And after the first few times, I learned the real terror wasn't the hits, it was the helplessness. The knowledge that I couldn't stop it, that it would happen again and again, that nobody cared. They would trip me in the cafeteria, shove me into trees on hikes, mock my voice, my weight, my quietness. They stole my books and tore out the pages, spat in my food, made jokes about my mother. The worst was at night. Some nights I'd wake up covered in spit and snot, with RL and the others standing around me laughing. They blocked the bathroom, forced me to stay dirty, and bragged about it the next day. There was a boy in the corner with a shaved head and a confident sneer. Let's call him Ring or RL. I tried to explain about the beatings, the taunts, the piss incident. He told me I should stop making trouble, that I should just ignore them and they'll get bored. I flinched at every footstep. My stomach hurt all the time. My head throbbed from being punched so much. They told me to toughen up. I was the weird kid, the chubby kid with glasses who read science books instead of playing soccer. He'd whisper vile things to me, offer to stop the beatings if I helped him out in the bathroom. The world didn't care, and the rules I'd clung to, be good, be smart, treat people well, were a joke. A lie, but the scars were already there, and they would never fully fade. I lay there during the blanket beatings, staring at the dark fabric over my head, promising myself that one day, somehow, this would not be the end of me. I refused, terrified and disgusted, which made him double down on the abuse. They didn't want to deal with it, they didn't want to see it, and told me to clean up. That was it. From then on, I was pissed. The nickname stuck. They chanted it at me every time I walked by. He was bigger than the rest of us, maybe 13 or 14, all muscle and swagger. The moment he looked at me, something in my stomach turned to ice. They looked tired, distracted, some barely older than teenagers themselves. I brushed it off, but this was the 90s, in a country still clawing its way out of the Soviet era. There were no cell phones. The counselors watched the landlines and wouldn't let us call without permission. I sat up, disoriented, smelling something sharp and awful, and there he was, RL zipping up his pants. He started screaming that I'd wet myself like a baby. The whole cabin woke up. Someone turned on the lights. I was crying, humiliated, clutching the stained sheet, while RL ran out and brought in one of the counselors, yelling that I was a better. Maybe they were just waiting to warm up to us, I thought. Maybe it was me. Every morning before the counselors woke up, RL and his crew would gang up on me, beat me senseless, and vanish before anyone noticed. I never saw all their faces. I never knew who exactly hit me on any given day. We were divided into groups and marched toward our cabins. The first day was mostly orientation and unpacking. That first night, I lay in my bunk, exhausted but happy to be there, clutching my pillow and thinking about home. I woke up before dawn to muffled giggles. Then came the sound of footsteps around my bed, then silence. Before I could move, someone yanked the blanket over my head and bodies piled on top of me. Fists and elbows smashed into my ribs, shoulders, head. I tried to scream, but the sheet muffled my voice. It was the first of many blanket parties, as they called them. I tried fighting back. The counselors, when they did notice the bruises or the tears, shrugged it off as kids being kids. It got worse. And then there was the piss incident. One night I woke to a warm, horrifying wetness soaking through my sheets. The counselor barely looked at me. He scolded me in front of everyone. I wanted to call home. I wanted to tell my dad. I tried to tell one counselor what was happening, but they didn't. Every day was an exercise in surviving until lights out. I barely slept and RL was relentless. By the second week I was hollow. Something inside me cracked, like a bone splintering under too much weight. I stopped fighting. I stopped crying, and still there was no rescue, no parent swooping in, no counselor stepping up. That camp didn't just end my childhood. It killed the part of me that believed life was fair, that believed people would protect me if I followed the rules. I came back home with a blank stare and an empty heart, hiding most of what happened from my parents out of shame and confusion. There was one moment, buried deep in the mess of those camp days, that still sends a shiver down my spine when I think about it. RL cornered me near the old bathhouse. Late one night, I said no. I mumbled it, scared, barely able to get the words out. He didn't push further, just sneered and told me I was worthless, and that I'd regret it. That was the night I stopped hoping he'd stop on his own. In my mind I had failed a test my father would have passed without blinking. I was just trying to sneak in to wash the spit and snot off my face so I could feel human again. He told my father to fuck off and accused me of being a little pussy who needed to toughen up. I felt small, weak, humiliated all over again, not just because of our... The camp was gone for the season, the staff scattered. No one would talk, and I couldn't bear to tell him the rest. Trust didn't come easy anymore. I watched everyone closely, looking for cracks, hidden malice. I learned that sometimes you're on your own, and that when push comes to shove you either break or you turn cold enough to survive. But because the world, the adults I had trusted, were proving again and again that they wouldn't protect me, then he cut the line, leaving us standing there on the front stoop, humiliated and shaking with rage. He found out who the boy was, found out where he lived, while others wasted energy on guilt, fear, and second-guessing. I watch people, I read them like puzzles of body language, vocal inflection, subtle shifts in expression. I'd seen too much negligence and hypocrisy to believe in good intentions. Incompetence and cowardice made me seethe with silent contempt. And anyone who pushed me, cornered me, or thought they could take advantage of my apparent soft. They learned quickly that I was not the frightened 10-year-old they expected. I learned what motivated them, what scared them, what lies they told themselves and others. I never hurt someone for fun or because I was bored. But if someone gave me a reason, if they crossed a line, I had no hesitation in dismantling them completely. And in the moments when things got tense or dangerous, I was calm, ice cold. What started as numbness and detachment turned into a paternal way of moving through life that felt natural, almost comfortable. Most days I was just efficient, precise. I took pride in being reliable, in staying cool under pressure when others panicked. And even then, I held them at arm's length. I didn't feel empathy like others claimed they did, and it prepared me for a world that never cared about fairness in the first place. I could mimic it. Sure, I knew how to say the right words, nod at the right time, offer the right reaction. But inside, there was mostly just observation, calculation, quiet curiosity. A psychologist eventually put a label on it: borderline antisocial personality disorder. In simpler terms, a kind of. He drove us over to the RL's house, seething, ready to talk to the parents and demand answers. He buzzed the intercom, stated his business with ice in his voice. He wanted me broken, terrified, obedient. At home, my parents saw something was off immediately. My mother fussed over my scabs and scrapes. My father, tough, silent, a career soldier who'd seen real horrors, tried to coax something out of me. I told them some of it, that the other kids were mean, that they hurt me, that the counselors did nothing. But I left out the piss incident, the sexual threat, the worst nights of spit and snot and helpless rage. I clung to the last bit of dignity I had left, refusing even though it meant more pain, more nights of choking on fear. He blocked the door, leaning in close with that awful grin. He told me, with a kind of casual cruelty that only a teenager can muster, that if I wanted the beatings and humiliation to stop, I'd have to do him a favor. I froze. I remember my stomach twisting, my skin crawling. It wasn't just the physical beatings after that, it was the unspoken threat that he could make it so much worse. When the 2 weeks finally ended, I got on the bus with bruises under my shirt, dark circles under my eyes, and a stone lodged in my chest. I was ashamed. I felt dirty, like part of me had invited it somehow by being soft, by not fighting hard enough, by not being tougher. My father, to his credit, didn't let it slide. RL's father didn't even bother coming out. His voice crackled through the speaker, dismissive, dripping with contempt. I remember my father's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw set so tight I thought his teeth might crack. My father tried to push further through official channels, but back then, there was no real system in place. So I buried it deep. I learned to smile, to joke, to pretend it was behind me. But under the surface I was changing, hardening. I didn't break. But the kid I'd been, the hopeful nerd who believed the world was fair, he was gone forever. By my mid-20s, the cracks beneath my surface had become something permanent. It didn't mean I was violent or out to hurt random people. It meant I was different. Emotions came to me, but they were dulled, distant, something I could almost choose to lean into or ignore. Happiness, anger, sadness, they required strong triggers. What replaced those missing pieces of normal humanity was something sharp and useful. Focus. This wasn't the movie version of a sociopath nor a maniacal grinning, no craving for bloodshed. But beneath that outward control lay something brittle, a deep distrust of anyone claiming authority or moral superiority. The world thought sociopaths were monsters. In reality, we're just humans built differently, lacking certain filters, certain brakes, but not driven by random malice. It's ironic, really, that childhood hell forged the very traits that later made me valuable in jobs where empathy was often a liability. By the time I hit my late 20s, I'd drifted through a few jobs, at IT gigs, warehouse work, even tried freelancing. But nothing clicked until I landed a position as a security guard at one of the busiest bars in the city. This wasn't mall security or graveyard shift patrol duty. This was real work, the kind where you needed instincts, quick reflexes, and a cold calm when things got ugly. Where other guys got jumpy or took things personally, I was a ghost. You ignored it, you were out, no exceptions. This system worked. Most people simmered down once they realized we were serious. Older, hairline thinning, cheeks flushed with cheap booze. RL, my stomach clenched before my brain even caught up. I read body language, spotted trouble before it started, and kept my tone steady even when someone was 2 inches from my face screaming. My reputation grew someone you didn't want to mess with, but also someone the regulars respected. Checked Tomas first. His arm was already swelling, blood dripping onto the floor. I told the staff to call the cops and then slipped out into the night after 2 of his buddies, wiry guys, also playing drunk, waited just outside the entrance. The setup was obvious. They were baiting Tomas, or me, into a street fight where they thought they'd have the upper hand. Our bar had a reputation. It drew a mix of regulars, rough edges, and out-of-towners looking to show off. He thought he could run from what he'd done, but I wasn't going to let him. This time, I was ready. There were fights, threats, weapons sometimes. The management didn't want meatheads in uniform scaring off customers, though. His buddies spread out, circling me like vultures. My partner that night, a good guy named Tomas, moved in and gave him the standard warning. Back off, or you're out. One of his friends grabbed me from behind. I drove my elbow into his gut, pivoted, cracked him across the jaw. He hit the pavement hard. RL didn't listen. He grabbed an empty beer bottle from a table, but there was no flicker of recognition in his eyes. Just hate for the guy who ruined his little stunt. He had no clue who I was. Men who, like my father, remembered exactly what I'd suffered as a kid. And prisons back then weren't the gentle, rehabilitative places you saw on Western TV shows. They were brutal, especially for guys up on sex charges and drug possession, and that made the moments almost sweet. RL tried to get up, cursing and spitting, but I pinned him with a knee and held him there, pressing just enough weight into his back to make him gasp for breath. Not even in court, not even when my name came up in police reports, the pudgy little boy he'd tortured in that camp was gone, replaced by someone colder, smarter, stronger. He didn't get to see it coming, and he didn't get to turn the tables, and smashed it across Tomas's elbow without warning. Then he bolted, grinning like a maniac. A warning bell that maybe, just maybe, the universe had a way of balancing the scales if you knew how to nudge it along. Couldn't have happened to a better person. Our job was to blend in plain clothes, always sober, always watchful. His eyes darted around, looking for an out, but there wasn't one. We carried batons, wore leather gloves, and kept a concealed firearm we hoped never to use. I fit right in. We had a simple one-strike rule. If you got out of Lynn harassing staff, shoving patrons, being an asshole, you got one warning. He pointed at RL, voice tight with pain. That's the asshole. Then one night, everything shifted. The police frisked him and found a small bag of weed in his pocket. He tried to claim it was planted, but nobody was buying it. One of the officers leaned close and told me RL was already up on sexual assault charges from another bar incident weeks earlier. I was on shift, leaning against the bar and chatting with a few regulars, when I saw him walk in. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? I wasn't the pudgy kid with glasses anymore. I was taller, broader, and harder around the edges. To him, I was just another face. At first he just wandered near the bar, loud and obnoxious, mouthing off to one of the waitresses. I remember the rush of old fury rising in my gut, but I held it down. I wasn't that terrified kid anymore, and this wasn't some playground scuffle. I followed RL out into the street, slipping the baton from under my jacket. He wasn't alone. RL saw me and sneered. "Look at this pussy," he spat, dropping the drunk act. "You wanna play hero? Huh?" I kept my voice even, almost bored. "Drop it and leave. Last chance." RL laughed and lunged. I stepped sideways, swung the baton low into his knee, and he went down with a grunt. The third guy hesitated. Smarty backed away, hands raised, before bolting into the night. "Stay down," I said. "Fuck you," he wheezed, still not recognizing me. A few minutes later, blue lights flashed at the corner, and the police arrived. Tomas came hobbling out, holding his arm. Turns out RL and his crew had been doing this around the neighborhood for weeks, provoking fights, jumping people, stirring chaos. As they loaded him into the cruiser, RL turned back and spat on the ground, glaring at me. Later that week, I learned from some old contacts of my father that RL would be headed to a prison run by a few men who had known my dad. I didn't need to lift a finger, I didn't need to say a word. Word got around. I heard RL had a rough time in there. The best part, he never figured out who I was. It was my first real taste of revenge. 5 years later, things had changed. I wasn't just a bouncer anymore, I was running security for the entire building. The bar had expanded, taken over the upper floors, and we'd turned the place into a multi-level complex that never really slept. Nights were busy, but by then, I had a crew I trusted, and the place ran like clockwork. Winter in the city was brutal. Temperatures could drop to -30, and the streets filled with desperate people looking for shelter. I stood there for a long moment, just staring. Part of me felt nothing, just that cold curiosity. Another part, buried under the ice, felt something like pity. Officially, we were supposed to clear out anyone trying to sneak upstairs and sleep in the old utility rooms. Unofficially, the security guys had an agreement. As long as they didn't break anything, bring in booze, or cause problems, we let them stay. I remembered piss-soaking my sheets and the counselor calling me Piss. He squinted into the dark, teeth chattering. "Wait, please. I didn't do anything," he stammered, voice cracking. He fell to his knees, sobbing, hands clasped in front of him. I remembered Arliss' laughter echoing in my head while I tried to scrub spit off my skin in a filthy bathroom. He tried to look away. I squeezed harder until his eyes met mine. I remembered Tomas clutching his shattered elbow, gasping in pain. Years later, we slipped them old blankets, gave them a few quiet hours of warmth, and nudged them out before dawn. No one spoke about it. We weren't saints, but we weren't animals either. You once told me you'd stop beating me if I jerked you off. The past came crashing into his dull eyes, brightening them with terror. Remember that. You've tried to get a kid to do that just so you could feel big. One night I was making my rounds, checking the dark corners for squatters or stragglers, when I heard snoring behind a half-closed door. I nudged it open, expecting to find one of the regulars. He woke with a start, eyes wild, breath clouding in the freezing air as I hauled him up and dragged him toward the door. He stumbled, half asleep, muttering, "Confused, please." It was RL. He looked like he wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was barely recognizable, gaunt, dirty, shaking, even in his sleep. His hair was ragged, his cheeks hollow. I turned to leave, thinking maybe life had already punished him enough. Maybe the past was better left buried. I stood up, towering over him as he crumpled further, hands shielding his head. Then I remembered. I remembered being 10, hiding under a blanket while fists rained down on me. "But I'm not even going to touch you again," I said. "Because you're nothing. You're already dead inside." Mercy didn't come easy. Not for someone like him. I slipped on my gloves, stepped into the room, and grabbed RL by the collar of his ragged coat. And in that moment, I felt nothing but a cold, quiet satisfaction. Outside, the cold slapped us both across the face. I didn't say a word. I shoved him further until we were in the alley, where the wind cut through everything. "Please," he begged, voice high and thin, "just let me stay. It's too fucking cold out here. I'll die." I crouched down, grabbed his chin, forced him to look at me. "You remember me now?" I asked. He blinked, confused, shaking his head. I leaned closer, voice flat. His mouth fell open, no sound coming out. But I saw the flicker the moment it clicked. "Wah," he tried. I cut him off. "If you want mercy, you'll have to give me a handjob first." He recoiled, mouth snapping shut, a choked sob rattling in his chest. "Thought so," I said, letting go of his face. "I could break you right here, leave you to freeze." He started weeping harder. The snow fell thick around us, coating his shoulders, his filthy hair. I turned and walked back inside, leaving him there in the dark, his sobs trailing behind me. Finally, he knew exactly who I was, and exactly what he'd done to build this moment. Years passed. I left security work behind, pivoting back to what I'd loved as a kid. Tech, machines, things that could be taken apart and rebuilt. I ended up leading the IT and R&D branch of a growing company. My talent for reading people, staying calm under pressure, and refusing to flinch in confrontation made me a natural negotiator. Whenever a client tried to screw us over, pull last-minute price cuts, deny payment, threaten legal battles, I was the guy they sent in. I laid out the facts, made the threat of consequences crystal clear, and didn't blink. I wouldn't let it happen on my watch. We acquired smaller businesses, old skating rinks, after-school clubs, and eventually a chain of summer camps. The same type of place that had destroyed my childhood. More often than not, they backed down. Ironically, my company began branching out into new markets, one of which was children's recreation. Maybe it is. Sometimes it's a choice you make, over and over, to let someone live in the shadow of what they did. That's the difference between childish vengeance and the real thing. But to me it's simple. A ritual, a reminder, a small power I hold. I'm not interested in redemption, or finishing him off. I just want him to exist, broken and hollow. I didn't just get even, I reclaimed the parts of myself he tried to destroy. Some might say I went too far, maybe, but I was forged in a summer camp furnace. What emerged wasn't a victim. It was a survivor with a long memory. And if you ever wonder whether karma's real, remember this. It never forgets. If you found this story intense, raw, or powerful, like, comment, and subscribe. There's more where that came from. Exactly as he left me when I was 10. I'd spent years hardening myself against the world, building a fortress where no one could hurt me. He lost a few fingers to frostbite, shuffled around the city with a permanent limp, never quite recovering from the damage done in prison or on the street. Just enough for a drink, a fix, a little more decay. He never thanked me. He never spoke, but he recognized me now. I made sure of it. Every so often I'd see him slumped against a wall, hand out, eyes glazed from whatever cheap poison he'd found to numb the misery. I did it because that S-what control looked like fixing the broken machinery so no other kid had to learn the same lesson the hard way. That was enough. And it was my victory. And here I was, shaping the place where kids like me would go, where they'd be safe, where they'd learn to trust again. That part made me pause. Summer camps, but I had control now. I reviewed policies myself. I talked to managers about safety protocols, staff training, background checks. I knew how monsters slipped through cracks. Sometimes, the universe hands you exactly the right irony. I didn't do it out of altruism, or else survive that winter. And every time I gave him money, some people might call it cruel. Revenge doesn't always mean violence or fire. Sometimes it's cold, methodical, quiet. It's not about rage. It's about control, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's calculated, quiet, and served when it stings the most.